Picture this. You're living 2,700 years before Christ, and your entire world can literally disappear in 10 heartbeats. Not from war, not from plague, not from famine, but because the very ground beneath your feet decides to throw a tantrum that would make a toddler jealous. This is the story of two clans who discovered something that would change human civilization forever. But let me set the scene for you first, because understanding what these people faced is crucial to appreciating what they accomplished. In the shadow of what they called the Singing Mountains, and trust me, when mountains sing, it's not exactly a lullaby, lived the Stone Bear clan. These weren't your average prehistoric folks scratching out a living in caves. Under the leadership of Grak the Mountain Breaker, a giant of a man whose reputation was built on more than just his impressive stature, they had developed a sophisticated society. Think about it, we're talking about people who had learned to work stone, create tools, establish hierarchies, and build semi-permanent settlements. This was advanced civilization for its time. But here's the thing about living in earthquake country that our ancestors discovered the hard way. All your human achievements mean absolutely nothing when the earth decides to rearrange itself. In the span of 10 heartbeats, count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, half the Stone Bear clan vanished. Not fled, not relocated. Vanished. Their ancestral caves, carved and expanded over generations, simply swallowed them whole during what they would later call the Great Shaking. Now imagine being Grak, this powerful leader, watching half your people disappear and realizing that all your strength, all your leadership, all your clan's accumulated wisdom couldn't do a thing against the raw power of geological forces. It's like being the strongest person in your neighborhood and then watching a hurricane tear through. You quickly realize you're playing by entirely different rules. Across the valley, and we're talking about distances that would take hours to traverse on foot through dangerous terrain, the Skywolf clan faced their own catastrophe. Led by Swift Eye, a leader whose name hints at someone who could see patterns others missed. They watched their proud stone halls crumble like sandcastles before an angry child. These weren't simple dwellings either. We're talking about multi-generation construction projects, buildings that represented the accumulated architectural knowledge of their people. Gone. In minutes. But here's where the story gets interesting, because catastrophe has this funny way of either destroying civilizations or forging them into something stronger. From the literal rubble of their destroyed world emerged something unprecedented. The first, listeners. These weren't mystics or fortune-tellers. These were Stone Bear shamans who developed what we might today call seismic monitoring techniques. They pressed their ears to the ground and learned to feel the earth's restless breathing days before it roared. Think about the observational skills required here. These people figured out that earthquakes don't just happen randomly. There are warning signs. The earth builds up tension, releases small tremors, shifts in ways that create detectable patterns. Leading this revolution was 16-year-old Mira Stone Whisperer, 16 years old. When you were 16, what were you doing? Probably not developing early warning systems for natural disasters that would save your entire community. But Mira discovered that certain stones hummed different songs before the ground shook. We're talking about prehistoric seismology here, developed by a teenager through pure observation and intuition. Meanwhile, the Sky Wolves weren't sitting idle. Under their astronomer priests, yes, these people had astronomer priests 2,700 years before Christ, noticed that unusual animal migrations and strange cloud formations preceded major tremors. They were developing their own early warning systems based on atmospheric and biological indicators. Now, you might think this shared threat would bring these clans together. You'd be wrong, because humans, even when faced with existential threats, have this remarkable ability to find things to fight about. The rivalry ignited over the Valley of Singing Stones. Picture a geological formation so unique that it had survived 1,000 earthquakes. We're talking about flexible rock formations, stones that could bend without breaking, a natural occurrence so rare that both clans considered it sacred ground. Both claimed it, both needed it, and neither was willing to share. But here's where this story takes a turn that would make modern urban planners weep with joy. Instead of fighting with spears and clubs, these clans launched what might be history's first building war, not fought with weapons, but with competing structures raised side by side. Think about that concept for a moment. Instead of destroying each other's buildings, they built better ones right next to them as a form of competition. The Stone Bears, led by the innovative Grey Elk, the foundation master, developed interlocking stone techniques that allowed walls to shift without breaking. These weren't just random experiments, they were systematically testing different approaches to earthquake-resistant construction. Grey Elk figured out that rigid structures fail, but flexible ones survive. His interlocking stone technique was essentially prehistoric shock absorption. The Sky Wolves, guided by Moonweaver, the Joint's mistress, and can we appreciate that title for a moment? The Joint's mistress, a specialist in connection systems, created wooden frame systems that bent like living trees. They understood that surviving earthquakes meant learning from nature, specifically from how trees survive storms by bending, rather than breaking. The competition intensified when both clans discovered the same terrible truth. Traditional building methods killed more people than wild beasts or enemy raids. Let that sink in for a moment. Your own architecture was more dangerous than predators or warfare. Every tremor became a test, each survival a lesson written in blood and dust. And here's where human nature gets really interesting. Families began secretly observing rival construction sites. Children trained as spies, memorizing joint patterns and foundation depths. We're talking about industrial espionage in the Bronze Age. The knowledge theft grew so common that builders began working under hide coverings, posting guards, and spreading false information about their methods. By winter's end, what began as a territorial dispute had transformed into the world's first technological arms race. Not weapons, technology, survival technology. The prize wasn't military superiority, but the ability to build structures that could laugh at earthquakes. These people were about to stumble onto discoveries that would revolutionize human civilization. They were developing engineering principles that modern architects still use today, but they had no idea they were making history. They just knew that when the mountains danced, only the clever survived. And the real test was just beginning. The second generation changed everything. And I mean everything. Because when your parents' generation has just figured out that traditional building methods are basically suicide by architecture, you don't just tweak the system, you revolutionize it. Picture this transformation. Within a single generation, both clans went from treating building as something any strong-backed adult could figure out, to recognizing that earthquake-resistant construction required the same level of specialized knowledge as warfare or spiritual leadership. This wasn't just a career change, this was a complete restructuring of society. Grak the Mountain Breaker made a decision that shattered every tradition his ancestors had established. He named his daughter Bright Stream as first builder, a position equal to war chief. Think about that for a moment. In a world where women typically weren't allowed to speak in council meetings, Grak just handed his daughter authority over life and death decisions for the entire clan. Not because he was progressive, but because Bright Stream had designed 3 structures that survived earthquakes when traditional male-built shelters had collapsed and killed their occupants. Across the valley, Swift Eye made an equally radical choice. She elevated Night Singer, her master architect, to sit at her right hand during councils. Night Singer wasn't just an advisor, he was given veto power over any decision that might affect building safety. Imagine a modern scenario where the city engineer could overrule the mayor on any construction decision. That's the level of authority these clans were giving to their builders. These appointments didn't happen in a vacuum. They reflected a terrifying new reality. Those who could build shelters that laughed at earthquakes held more power than those who could merely swing clubs effectively. Military might meant nothing if your fortress collapsed before the enemy even arrived. Political cunning was useless if your meeting halls couldn't survive a minor tremor. The great builder families emerged from this transformation, each guarding specific technical secrets like precious gems. And when I say secrets, I mean secrets that people would kill for. The Stone Bears' house of bending stones perfected what they called the sacred mortar, a mixture made from crushed volcanic glass, special clays that could only be found in specific mountain caves, and the blood of mountain goats that grazed on earthquake-fractured cliffs. This wasn't superstition dressed up as science. This was advanced materials engineering that created mortar which hardened strong yet allowed microscopic movement that prevented catastrophic failure. The Sky Wolf's lodge of dancing beams developed something even more revolutionary: wooden joints that could rotate 30 degrees in any direction without splitting. Picture a modern universal joint, except carved from wood using stone tools by people who had never heard of mechanical engineering. These joints were carved from trees that grew on earthquake-fractured cliffs, trees that had naturally developed flexible grain patterns from constantly swaying during tremors. But here's where the story gets really fascinating, because knowledge this valuable doesn't stay secret for long. Enter the spies. Ferret the Silent spent 3 years posing as a mute Sky Wolf apprentice. Think about the dedication required here. This man learned to communicate entirely through gestures, memorized complex building songs that encoded construction specifications in rhythm and verse, and lived among people who would have executed him instantly if they'd discovered his true identity. He was essentially a deep-cover industrial spy in the Bronze Age. His counterpart, a Sky Wolf infiltrator named Smoke Walker, took a different approach. She seduced a stone bear builder's daughter and spent 2 years learning the 17 foundation patterns that dispersed earthquake energy into harmless vibrations. We're talking about someone who built an entire fake relationship, complete with marriage negotiations and family integration, just to steal construction secrets. But here's the twist that makes this story truly remarkable. These 2 master spies eventually met in secret and began trading information that would save lives in both clans. Think about the psychology here. They started as enemies, trained to steal from each other, but when they actually met face to face and realized they were both trying to save people from horrible deaths, they began the world's first underground network of builders who valued human life over clan loyalty. The Festival of Standing Stones became the annual testing ground where this knowledge warfare played out in public. Teams had 40 days to build structures that would face judgment from the earth itself. And when I say judgment, I mean builders literally prayed for earthquakes to test their work. When the ground remained frustratingly stable, they created artificial tests, log rams swung by teams of men, synchronized jumping by entire families, anything to simulate the forces their buildings would face. The festival of 2690 before Christ changed everything. A massive earthquake struck during the final judging, and every single structure collapsed except two. Out of dozens of entries representing the best engineering knowledge of both clans, only 2 buildings survived. And here's the kicker: one was a stone bear hall using stolen Skywolf joint techniques, and the other was a Skywolf tower incorporating pilfered stone bear foundations. The message couldn't have been clearer if the earth itself had written it in stone. Hybrid knowledge created superior buildings. This is where women's roles in the story become absolutely crucial. Reed Weaver of the Skywolves made a discovery that revolutionized construction. Female woven wall supports, created with the same meticulous patience used for baby carriers, outlasted male-rushed versions by decades. The men had been approaching weaving as a speed contest, trying to finish quickly so they could move on to other tasks. The women understood that precision and patience created strength. Stone Bear matriarch Old Snow went even further. She instituted women-only building circles, where knowledge passed through lullabies, weaving patterns, and cooking recipes that encoded structural principles. A recipe for mountain bread might seem like instructions for food preparation, but it was actually a mnemonic device for remembering the precise ratios of different stone types needed for flexible foundations. A lullaby about sleeping babies contained the mathematical relationships for joint angles that would allow movement without failure. The men initially resented this parallel knowledge system. They saw it as undermining their authority and questioned whether women could really understand the complexities of earthquake engineering. That resistance ended abruptly when the women's techniques proved superior in several spectacular public demonstrations. Old Snow's team built a demonstration wall that withstood impacts that destroyed male-built structures twice as thick. By the end of this second generation, the transformation was complete. Building had evolved from manual labor to the most prestigious intellectual pursuit in both societies. Master builders commanded resources and respect that rivaled clan leaders. Technical knowledge had become the ultimate form of power. But the most important change was something neither clan fully recognized yet. They were becoming dependent on each other's innovations. Every major breakthrough seemed to require knowledge from both traditions. The hybrid structures weren't just better, they were pointing towards something neither clan could achieve alone. The stage was set for either the greatest cooperation in human history or the most catastrophic knowledge war ever fought, and the Earth was about to force them to choose. The Winter of Sorrow arrived in 2673. Before Christ, and let me tell you, this wasn't just a bad season, this was the kind of geological nightmare that makes you question whether the gods have a personal vendetta against your entire species. 7 massive earthquakes in 7 days, not tremors, not minor shakes, massive earthquakes that registered what we would today call magnitude 7 or higher. Each one struck when people thought the worst was over, when they were trying to dig survivors out of the rubble from the previous disaster. Imagine living through the worst natural disaster of your lifetime, and then having it happen again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. By the 4th day, with aftershocks continuing to claim lives and both clans facing what could only be described as extinction-level casualties, something unprecedented happened. Stonebear, Princess Bright Dawn, and Skywolf Prince Stormcaller met at the Neutral Spring, a place where both clans had traditionally come to collect water during times of truce, and proposed something that would have been unthinkable, just weeks earlier, full knowledge exchange to save both peoples. Think about what this meant. These weren't just young idealists making naive proposals. Bright Dawn was the daughter of Grak the Mountain Breaker, and had been trained since childhood in the sacred building secrets of her people. Stormcaller was next in line to lead the Sky Wolves, and had memorized every architectural innovation his clan had developed. They were proposing to give away their people's most precious secrets to their traditional enemies. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Thunderarm of the Stone Bears, a traditionalist who traced his lineage back 7 generations, declared that the ancestors would curse any who revealed sacred techniques to ancient enemies. This wasn't just political opposition. Thunderarm genuinely believed that sharing building knowledge would bring supernatural punishment on his entire clan. Skywolf Shaman Broken Fang went even further, prophesying doom for those who mixed building traditions. He claimed the earth spirits demanded pure practices, and that hybrid techniques were an abomination that would anger the geological forces even more. According to Broken Fang, the earthquakes were punishment for the knowledge theft that had already occurred, and full cooperation would bring about the end of the world. But here's the thing about catastrophe. It has this way of making abstract principles seem pretty foolish when children are dying in front of you. The death count was mounting over 300 souls lost, including 60 children. 60 children. In societies where every child represented the future of the clan, losing 60 kids was like watching your civilization's tomorrow disappear. The secret nighttime meetings began at Moonpool, a natural formation halfway between the 2 settlements where the sound of running water would mask conversations from potential eavesdroppers. Picture these gatherings. Master architects from rival clans meeting by firelight, demonstrating their most precious techniques to people they'd been trained to hate since childhood. The mistrust ran so deep that builders brought weapons to these peaceful knowledge exchanges. Everyone understood they were taking enormous personal risks. If their own people discovered what they were doing, the punishment would likely be death for treason. If the people they were trying to help decided to eliminate potential rivals instead of cooperating, death was equally likely. Skywolf Master Red Oak famously threw down his spear after watching Stonebear architect Granite Hand save his nephew with a foundation technique that prevented a partially collapsed building from finishing its fall. Red Oak's nephew had been trapped under debris, and traditional Skywolf rescue methods would have brought the rest of the structure down on top of him. Granite Hand used a Stonebear shoring technique that stabilized the ruins long enough for a safe rescue. As Red Oak watched his nephew crawl to safety, he declared, "Knowledge that saves children cannot be evil." That moment changed everything, because once you've seen enemy techniques save your family members, it becomes pretty hard to maintain that those enemies are fundamentally wrong about everything. The Great Synthesis accelerated when the most powerful women from both clans made a decision that forced everyone in hand. Pregnant women from both societies, led by the formidable grandmothers Yellow Moon and Frostwalker, occupied the disputed Valley of Singing Stones and refused to leave until their men agreed to cooperate. Think about the symbolism here. Pregnant women, representing the future of both clans, literally putting their bodies between their peoples and the territory they were fighting over. These weren't helpless victims making emotional appeals. These were the wives and daughters of clan leaders making a calculated political move that their husbands and fathers couldn't ignore without looking like monsters. They established the first mixed construction crews, with Stone Bear Foundation specialists working alongside Sky Wolf joint masters. The language barriers alone should have made this impossible. Different clans had different technical vocabularies, different measurement systems, different traditional methods. But when your life depends on getting it right, people find ways to communicate. The hybrid structures they built told the real story. When the seventh Great Earthquake struck the worst of the sequence, these experimental mixed clan buildings stood, while pure tradition structures continued falling. The evidence was undeniable. Cooperation didn't just save face, it saved lives. The transformation culminated in the Unity Festival, where both clans performed the ceremony of joined hands. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, they literally built a great hall together, with alternating crews adding each layer. Stone Bear teams would lay foundations, Sky Wolf teams would add walls, Stone Bear teams would install roof supports, Sky Wolf teams would complete the structure. The building itself became a physical representation of their cooperation. Former spy, Ferret the Silent, made the most dramatic gesture of the entire festival. He publicly revealed his true identity, admitted to 3 years of deception, and then shared all the stolen knowledge he'd gathered not just with his own people, but with both clans. Instead of execution for treason, he earned forgiveness and adoption into the Skywolf clan. The people he'd deceived chose to honor him for his courage in coming forward. By spring, intermarriage between builder families became not just common but strategically advantageous. Children who inherited both traditions naturally understood techniques that adults had to learn through difficult cross-cultural exchange. These kids grew up bilingual in construction techniques, equally comfortable with Stone Bear flexibility principles and Skywolf joint engineering. The unified Builder Alliance emerged not through conquest but through what you might call the mathematics of survival. Their careful record-keeping showed that cooperation saved 70% more lives than competition. When the choice comes down to maintaining pride versus keeping your children alive, most people choose their children. But this unity came with a price that nobody fully anticipated, because once you've proven that cooperation can achieve what competition never could, you've also proven that you're now capable of things that might threaten everyone else in the region. And that realization was about to change everything about how the outside world viewed these former enemies, who had become something much more dangerous: allies. Within a single generation, the Builder Alliance transformed from desperate survivors into something the ancient world had never seen before. A civilization that conquered not through military might, but through superior engineering. And let me tell you, when your competitive advantage is building things that don't fall down, you've got a pretty sustainable business model. The transformation started to become visible to outsiders during what became known as the Demonstration of 2650. Picture this. Neighboring tribes had been watching these former enemies work together and were getting nervous. Two clans that had spent generations trying to destroy each other were now building structures that made everyone else's architecture look like children's sandcastles. The other tribes wanted to see just how good this alliance really was. What they got was a demonstration that would haunt their nightmares for generations. Alliance engineers publicly collapsed traditional buildings from 6 different neighboring tribes using small, controlled tremors that barely shook the ground. Then they had their own structures endure the same forces without a single stone shifting out of place. It wasn't just a technological demonstration, it was a declaration that the old rules of power no longer applied. Think about what this meant for international relations. For thousands of years, military strength had determined which groups survived and which disappeared. Suddenly, there was a new form of power that made traditional warfare seem almost obsolete. What good are the best warriors in the world if their fortress collapses before the battle even starts? The Alliance leadership understood the implications immediately. They weren't just sitting on superior technology, they were sitting on a monopoly that could reshape civilization. But here's where they made a brilliant strategic decision. Instead of hoarding their knowledge or using it to conquer everyone else, they turned earthquake-resistant construction into the world's first technology export business. The knowledge empire expanded through what we might today call calculated generosity. The Alliance offered basic earthquake-resistant techniques to neighboring tribes in exchange for resources they needed: rare metals, specific types of stone, exotic woods that grew in different climates. But here's the crucial part. They always stayed 3 innovations ahead of anything they shared. They'd teach you how to build walls that could survive minor tremors, but the techniques for major earthquake resistance remained Alliance secrets. This created exactly the kind of dependent relationships that modern technology companies would recognize. Other tribes could build adequate shelters using Alliance techniques, but when they wanted to construct anything truly monumental, temples, fortifications, great halls, they needed Alliance expertise. It was like having a monopoly on the internet while everyone else was still using dial-up modems. The master builders, now called Earth Dancers, established schools where foreign students learned simplified versions of techniques, while Alliance youth received complete training. These schools became incredibly prestigious institutions. Sending your children to study with the Earth Dancers was like getting them accepted to the ancient world's equivalent of MIT. Political power followed architectural achievement in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier. The position of Grand Builder, rotating between former Stonebear and Skywolf families, carried authority equal to traditional chiefs. But succession wasn't hereditary. Candidates had to complete the trial of 7 sheikhs, building a structure that could survive 7 different stress tests, representing various earthquake types. Young Flower of Granite became the first female Grand Builder after her revolutionary suspension bridge design allowed safe crossing even during severe tremors. This wasn't just about gender equality. This was about recognizing that the best engineering minds deserved power, regardless of traditional social limitations. Her bridge, by the way, stood for over 800 years and became a pilgrimage destination for architects from across the known world. The economic transformation proved equally dramatic. Building inspection became a lucrative profession that didn't exist before the Alliance formed. Certified Earth Whisperers traveled between settlements to approve construction, and their word could make or break entire building projects. The Alliance controlled the certification process, creating artificial scarcity that maintained their prosperity while ensuring quality control. Specialized tools became trade goods more valuable than gold or salt. The secret formula: flexible chisels that could carve joints, allowing 30-degree rotation, the precision joint saws that created perfectly fitted connections. These tools were Alliance monopolies that commanded prices that would make modern pharmaceutical companies jealous. The cultural impact resonated far beyond construction. Marriage ceremonies incorporated ritual shelter building, where couples demonstrated their ability to work together under stress. If you couldn't cooperate effectively enough to build an earthquake-resistant dwelling, maybe you weren't ready for the lifelong cooperation that marriage required. Children's games evolved to teach engineering principles. The popular Shaking Mountain game required players to build increasingly complex structures, while others tried to topple them with controlled vibrations. Kids were learning structural engineering concepts before they could properly hold adult tools, creating a generation that understood earthquake resistance as naturally as they understood language. Even burial practices changed. The dead were interred in earthquake-proof tombs that ensured eternal rest would remain undisturbed by Earth's trembling. These weren't just practical considerations, they reflected a fundamental shift in how people viewed their relationship with geological forces. Instead of seeing earthquakes as uncontrollable divine punishment, they'd learned to see them as engineering challenges that human ingenuity could overcome. The greatest test of everything the Alliance had built came in 2620, with what they called the War of Jealous Hearts. 5 warrior tribes, growing increasingly resentful of Alliance prosperity and influence, united with a simple goal: destroy the Builder Alliance and steal their secrets through traditional military conquest. The siege of Builder's Heart City lasted 100 days. But here's the beautiful irony. Walls designed to survive earthquakes proved equally resistant to battering rams and siege engines. Flexible construction that dispersed earthquake energy worked exactly the same way against impact from weapons. The Alliance hadn't just built earthquake-resistant architecture, they'd accidentally created military fortifications that made traditional siege warfare obsolete. But the conflict ended not through military victory, but through a calculated decision that revealed just how much the Alliance leadership had learned about human nature. The Grand Builders Council voted to publicly reveal medium-level techniques to all the attacking tribes. Their reasoning was brilliant. Widespread knowledge would prevent future jealousy-based conflicts, while the Alliance maintained superiority through their most advanced techniques. It worked. The attacking tribes got valuable knowledge that improved their own construction, making the siege profitable for them, even though they didn't achieve total victory. The Alliance demonstrated that they were willing to share benefits rather than hoarding them, which reduced the incentive for future attacks, and they maintained their technological edge while diffusing the political tensions that had created the conflict. This is the legacy that lasted, not just the engineering techniques, but the understanding that knowledge shared strategically creates more stability than knowledge hoarded defensively. Today, archaeologists studying ancient ruins find stone bear sky wolf hybrid structures still standing after 4,700 years. Their flexible joints and dispersed foundations continue to dance with earthquakes exactly as their builders intended. Modern engineers examine these structures and find techniques that independently rediscovered principles we didn't formally understand until the 19th century after Christ. Logarithmic force distribution, harmonic resonance damping, multidirectional stress management. But the greatest legacy isn't carved in stone, it's written in the lesson these people left for every civilization that followed them. They proved that deadly rivalry could be transformed through shared crisis into cooperative innovation that elevated all humanity. They showed that the choice between competition and collaboration isn't just about idealism or politics, it's about survival. When the mountains danced, the clever didn't just survive, they learned to dance back. And in learning that dance, they discovered something that changed the world forever. The power of human beings working together is stronger than any force the earth can unleash against them. The question isn't whether we can build structures that survive natural disasters. The question is whether we can build civilizations that survive our own human nature. The stone bears and sky wolves proved it's possible. They just had to nearly destroy themselves first to figure out how.